The noon bell had not yet tolled when Sheriff Kane came out of the heat haze with a man in shackles and a crowd gathering like storm clouds around them. Dust lifted in low yellow ghosts with every step. The cowboy, sunburnt, split-lipped, hat gone, stumbled once, and Kane yanked him upright by the chain, iron biting through raw skin. Boots scuffed, spurs rasped. Somewhere, a screen door banged and kept swinging, the squeak repeating like a question nobody dared ask. On the far end of the street, the gallows posts cast a black ladder of shadow over the packed earth. Above them, the rope swayed in a lazy noon breeze, creaking like an old ship. Kane did not look that way. The badge pinned to his duster, silver clean despite the dust, caught a shard of sun and threw it across the prisoner's face. He blinked against it, jaw clenched. "By order of the territory," Kane called, his voice cutting through the heat, "this man stands arrested for shooting a deputy of Elk Ridge." A murmur moved through the onlookers. Men on stoops, women shielding their eyes with aprons, a boy up on the water trough rail as if it were a grandstand. The cowboy tugged against the chain, but not like a man trying to escape. More like a man trying to say something with his body when his mouth wouldn't be heard. Then she stepped into the street. Bare feet kicking dust, hair in 2 black braids, ends bound with faded blue cloth. A small figure against the white glare. An Apache girl, no more than 16, maybe 17, cheeks wet, breath quick. She didn't shout. She fell to her knees so fast, the ground puffed up around her, palms pressed to the earth as if the town itself were a witness. "Sheriff," she said, voice hushed but carrying, "mercy, please." Kane's hand tightened on the chain. The prisoner turned toward her and flinched like he'd rather face the rope than those eyes. "He saved me," the girl said, lifting her gaze to Kane. Her irises were so dark, they seemed to swallow the sun. Out past Dry Branch. "Bandits. He pulled me from them. He did not shoot your man." Someone up the street spit into the dust. A chair scraped. The blacksmith's hammer stopped mid-blow. The prisoner, hatless, sandy hair pasted to his bloody brow, swallowed and found his voice. "Name's Jesse Thorne," he said hoarsely. "I didn't touch that deputy. I was riding for help." Kane's steel-gray eyes found the girl and held. There was wind in those eyes, and old fire. The corner of his mouth ticked like he wanted to speak and decided against it. He kept his voice flat. Deputy Lyle Briggs took a rifle ball to the lung before sunrise. "You were at his side when I crested the arroyo." "I was holding him up," Thorne said, "trying to keep breath in him. Men don't keep breath in a deputy with powder on their hands." Kane lifted Thorne's wrists, black around the nail beds, stippled on his fingers. "You fired a gun, 3 times, at the bastards who dragged her off a wagon." Thorne nodded at the girl. "Ask her." Heads turned as one. The girl rose from her knees and stepped closer, skirts stuck with burrs and ash. Behind her, a quilted silence fell over the storefronts. "He fought them," she said. "He put himself between me and knives. Took a cut here." She pointed to the ridge of dried blood along Thorne's ribs beneath his torn shirt. Kane's thumb unconsciously found the edge of his badge. He spun it once. For a man like him, thinking looked like movement, small and dangerous. In his mind, a door he never opened on purpose swung wide, his wife's hands cold in his son's shoes abandoned beside a burned crib, the stink of rope smoke on a night he could not forget. Women and children, always the tinder in his blood. He shut the door hard. "The jailhouse first," he said. "Truth after." The girl took another step, tiny breaths, shuddering. "If law is blind, Sheriff, lend it your eyes. Please, he doesn't belong to the rope." A wavering laugh came from the saloon porch. A merchant with too much daytime whiskey in him. "That girl's people are trick-mouthed, whisper you kind, rob you blind." Several nods met that. Others looked away, ashamed. Kane swung to the heckler so fast, the man jolted back, knuckles white on the rail. Kane didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You're talking to a child," he said, words like iron. The man's mouth closed with an audible click. "Sheriff." The voice belonged to Doc Ellery, gray hair, spectacles fogged with sweat. He approached with a towel over one shoulder. "Briggs still breathes, barely. Bullet went clean. If there's mercy to be asked, it may be from him when he wakes." "If," Kane said. "If could mean everything or nothing." He started walking again. The town moved with him, a tide. The heat leaned in. The jailhouse, thick adobe, iron-barred windows like dark teeth, waited at the end of the street. Behind, the gallows rope creaked to itself. Thorne stumbled. Kane kept him steady with a grip that was firm, not cruel. The girl came alongside, keeping pace, each footfall soft and soundless, close enough for Kane to hear the small music of her beads, close enough for him to smell smoke in her hair. "Your name?" he asked without looking. "Tala," she said, "daughter of Goya. He trades horseflesh and coffee at the river market." "You speak English well." She lifted her chin, the slightest defiance shining through fear. "I listen well." They reached the jailhouse steps. Kane halted. The keys hung against his thigh on a leather thong, warm metal tapping the brass rivets. He could feel every eye in town weighing his fingers. He could feel the Apache girl's plea sitting like an ember on his tongue. Thorne licked cracked lips. "Sheriff, let me say it to you plain. I came off the high ledge, heard the scream, saw two men hauling her toward the willows. I shot once to scatter 'em, twice to warn 'em, and then I heard a rifle bark from down in the arroyo. I carried your deputy uphill till my legs shook. When you rode up, you saw the end of a thing, not the start." "And the men?" Kane asked. "Gone," Thorne said, "like smoke." Kane's jaw worked. He could taste dust and copper. He pictured a rifleman crouched among rabbit brush, firing uphill, then vanishing on a cut trail. He pictured Briggs, hard man, bad debt, quick temper, on the wrong ridge at the wrong hour. He pictured an Apache girl bound to a willow and bit down until his molars hurt. The crowd pressed closer. "Hang him!" someone shouted from the back. Somebody else hissed, "Hush!" The gallows rope answered with its wooden whisper. Kane spoke, so the whole street could hear. "No rope today, not in my town. He goes in a cell. We wait for Briggs to speak." A rustle of dissatisfaction met that. The kind of sound men make when a blood hunger goes unfed. The butcher muttered something about softness. The blacksmith's wife gave Kane a long, strange look, as if she saw, behind the hat brim and dust and silver star, a man buried alive with his dead and fighting for breath. Tala reached for Kane's coat. Her fingers trembled on the black duster, then withdrew as if she'd touched a stove. "Thank you," she whispered, "but he will not live if the law turns its face." Kane's eyes flicked to her, then to the faces crowding the steps. His scar caught the light when he turned his head. He felt the old words lift up in him like a storm he couldn't hold back. When he spoke them, something always changed. "Law ain't always justice," he said softly. The street gone so quiet even flies seemed to hang in place. Then his voice found iron. "But justice rides with me." He took the keys. The ring chimed once, bright, brittle. He unlocked the door, its hinges coughing up a cold breath from inside. The cell bars were black with oil, the cot neatly made, the bucket empty and waiting, symbols of law, tools and promises. "Step in," Kane told Thorne. The cowboy did, wincing as the chain dragged across his raw wrist. Tala remained just beyond the threshold, as if some line had been drawn across the stone that her world would not cross. She reached through the bars with both hands and pressed them to Thorne's fingers. "I will speak to your deputy," she said. "I will tell him what I saw." "Girl," Kane started, her eyes cut to him. "I know what men think of my people in this town. I speak anyway." Something like respect flashed in Kane's gaze and slipped away before it could soften him. He swung the cell door. It closed with a thick, final sound. The locked tongue slid home like a blade sheathed, irreversible enough for the hour. From the street came the crack of a bottle, a laugh too loud, a horse's uneasy stamp. Heat pressed low and hard against the jailhouse walls. Kane turned toward the doorway, badge catching the light, and took one step. Tala's pupils blew wide. She sucked a breath. "Sheriff, don't move." Kane froze. In the slatted shadow, cast by the jail's overhang, something metallic clicked. A distinct, spider-thin sound that only a man like him would hear and count as a prayer or a curse. He didn't turn his head. He glanced down, seeing what the dust would tell him if he dared. A fresh boot scuff beside the doorframe where there shouldn't be one, a pinch of charcoal black powder on the sill. Outside, the crowd's murmur thinned, pulled taut by the same thread of danger. Somewhere above Kane's hat brim, a rifle bead might be easing onto the base of his skull. He let his hand fall near the pearl grip of his Colt, but not onto it. Slowly, like lowering a lantern into a mine. "Speak," he said to the doorway, voice quiet as shade. "If you've got something to say it where I can look a man in the eyes." Nothing answered. Then a breath he didn't own stirred the dust to his right, and the shadow moved. The click came again, faint, spider-thin. Kane shifted his weight a finger's breadth, nameplate light catching on his badge and spilling a shard of sun into the doorway shadow. The shadow flinched. Kane moved. His Colt cleared leather with a whisper. The shot cracked like split cedar, chewing splinters from the post an inch above a hidden rifle barrel. "Drop it," he said, voice low enough to rattle only the nearest dust. Metal clattered on stone. A man lurched into view with both hands raised, hat brim dripping sweat. Not an outlaw's colors, plain work shirt, a town man trying to look small. Rance Mercer. Cattle shares, big mouth, bigger debts. "You aim iron at a lawman?" Kane said, stepping in close. "You best pray fast." He kicked the rifle back into the sunlight. The barrel's fresh oil stung his nose. So did clove, the kind of fancy tobacco that came in tins men bought when they wanted to smell like somebody else. Mercer's jaw shook. "Didn't mean you, Sheriff. Meant the killer. Meant to." "Lying to my face ain't cheap," Kane said. He spun his badge once, thinking, then caught Mercer by the shirt and shoved him through the door. Iron sang. The empty cell beside Thorne's yawned. The lock took Rance like a mouth closing on a lie. From the far cell, Jesse Thorne lifted his head. Under the blood and dust, his look said what his throat couldn't. This wasn't random. Somebody wanted him dead before his story breathed. Tala stood as near to the bars as the stone threshold allowed, her braids dark ropes against a sunlit haze. The tiny blue cloth at their ends trembled. He came to kill, she said, not asking. Kane holstered his Colt, felt the familiar weight press against his ribs like a vow. Maybe. Or maybe he came to make the town believe a thing I won't. He jerked his chin at Mercer. Why the clove, Rance? Mercer swallowed. Poker habit. Helps a man think. Helps a man stink. Kane leaned in, close enough to see the sweat webbing Rance's pores, close enough to smell the oil and tin. Who sent you? No one. His eyes slid sideways. Guilty man's sunrise. Citizens Committee's restless is all. They want it quick. Committee. Kane let the word hang like a noose. Vigilantes in church coats. Men who hired rough work so their hands stayed white. He turned to Tala. Tell me again. Her voice steadied as she spoke. Dry Branch. The wagon tore. 2 men with knives dragged me. She touched the air toward Thorn, fired to scare them. A shot came from below, not from us. Your deputy fell like a cut tree. Below? Kane asked. Tala's gaze flicked to the floor, measuring memory. From the arroyo cut, hidden, I smelled smoke, but not the thick kind. Sharp, like chemical. She searched for English. Like medicine fire. Thorn nodded, lips cracked. Smokeless powder. Some Eastern peddlers carry it, and a Henry throws a different bark in a dry draw. Kane filed it, where he kept the world's crooked lines. He'd heard that bark once on the Pecos, when cavalry money was greased with private hands. He felt his temper rise like heat shimmering off iron. He pressed it down. Outside, the street swelled, boots on packed earth, the thread of men pulling tight. A voice, same merchant from the saloon, pitched loud for courage. We say hang him now. A coil of rope flipped up over the jail's porch beam. The knot swung there, lazy and obscene, a pale worm against the dark lintel. Kane stepped to the door. The heat slapped him. The rope creaked. Shadows of hats sliced across the glare. No rope, he said, even, carrying. Not while I wear this star. The crowd shifted, a herd feeling fence and not liking it. The blacksmith's wife stood with hands knuckled white on her apron. The butcher glowered, cheeks red as his trade. Mercer's brother hunched behind them, eyes on the rope, like it might wriggle into his hand. You blind, Kane? The merchant called. Deputy Briggs is dyin'. The man you locked up did it. What else is a sheriff for? Kane let the heat slow his breath. A sheriff's for keepin' law from turnin' into a fever. He pointed with his chin at the gallows down the street, its shadow a crosshatch stare on the dirt. Justice steps one rung at a time. You skip, you fall, a mutter, a curse, a boot scuffed. Kane saw the men who would jump if pushed, and the men who were looking for someone else to push them. He slid his thumb along the badge's edge, then spoke again, softer. The quiet turned the words to steel. You want to test me? You bring your rope. But you remember, if you're right, the rope gets its due tomorrow. If you're wrong, you carry that wrong to your grave. Reckon any of you ready to haul that behind ya? Silence widened like shade. The rope stopped swaying. Kane turned back inside. Tala stood as if she'd been cut from the dark, eyes darker still. You fight the town for a man you don't know, she said. I fight the noose when it's hungry, Kane said. I've seen what it eats. He dropped his voice. I'll ride to the arroyo. I'll read what the ground says. If your story's true, I'll find where it bled. Take me, Tala said. No, Kane answered, too quick. The word burned his tongue. He tasted rope smoke on an old night. He made his voice a softer thing. You stay here, safer behind my walls. A brittle laugh came from Mercer's cell. Safe? With that crowd? Sheriff, you ain't got enough iron to hold them much longer. Kane didn't bother looking at him. You're in chains, Rance. Worry about your own neck. He took his hat from the peg, set its black brim against the light, and glanced at Thorne. You keep breathing till I get back. Thorne tried a smile that looked like it hurt. I'll try to be obliging. Bootsteps clattered on the boardwalk. Doc Ellery filled the doorway, hair wild with hurry, spectacles fogged from running. Sweat made dark commas down his shirt. He gripped the jam like he'd been hauling the town on his back. Kane, he puffed. Briggs, he's come to. Kane's pulse spiked once. Clean, bright. Can he speak? Not loud, but he said 2 words clear enough. Doc swallowed. Adam's apple jumping. Wolf's tooth. Tala's breath snagged. Rance Mercer sagged against the bars as if something inside him had just recognized itself. He wore a bone charm at his throat, a carved canine tied to a strip of lace, fashion for men who wanted to look like they'd done more than talk. Kane reached through the bars, ripped it loose, and held it up. It swung from his fist, ticking against his knuckles. Pretty trinket, Kane said. Who else in town wears one? Mercer licked his lips. Plenty. Fitch the gambler, couple drovers. It's a style. And the clove? Kane asked. That a style, too? Mercer said nothing. His silence said plenty. Doc wiped his brow, eyes cutting to the window and back. He's weak, Sheriff. If you want what else he has, you'd best come now. Kane hesitated. The jail felt like a loaded room. Powder, spark, one mistake. He looked at Tala and at Jesse in the dark behind the bars. You keep the door barred, he told Tala. You don't open it for voices you know, only for me. I am not a child, she said, chin lifting. No, Kane said. You're the reason a good man might hang if I don't move. He touched the brim of his hat to her, a gesture he gave precious few. Then he nodded to Doc. Let's go. They stepped into the white glare. Heat snapped at leather like tiny teeth. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but because there was something in Kane's eyes that made sensible men give him the width of a grave. He and the doctor had taken 3 steps when a glass bottle arced from somewhere on the saloon porch, throat stuffed with rag flame. It hit the jail wall and flowered into fire, bright and ravenous, whiskey breath turning to dragon heat. Tala cried out. Inside, dry wood caught with a cough and a roar. Kane spun, fast as a man could move without leaving parts behind. Water, he barked, and the blacksmith was already pulling the pump handle like he meant to break it. Wives shoving buckets into a chain. Firelight rolled across Kane's badge. It flashed like an eye. He shouldered through smoke, slammed the jail door open, and was met by breathless, leaping heat. Tala was there with her shawl beaten wet from the bucket trough, slapping at flame along the floorboards. Jesse Thorne had shoved his blanket through the bars to tamp the smaller tongues. Smoke crawled into Kane's nose and made knives of his lungs. He grabbed the burning rag where it guttered against the wall, scorched his palm, and ripped it free. He flung it out into the street where boots stomped and curses rose. The worst of the flame died into sullen black. The walls still glowed like coals under thin ash. Kane coughed until he saw stars, then looked up to the porch beam. The rope was swaying again, as if some invisible hand had given it a playful nudge. Doc Ellery's voice broke on the doorway. "Kane, Briggs is slipping again." "Get him breathing," Kane said, eyes on the crowd. Through the smoke, he saw men looking at the charred spot on his jail, with expressions that had learned nothing. Above them, on the saloon balcony, a man leaned in the haze, hat low, shoulders easy, a tin of clove between finger and thumb. When he saw Kane see him, he smiled, slow, like a lesson was being taught. Kane took a step for the street. Something rolled over the threshold and came to rest against his boot. A short stick wrapped in red paper and twine, fuse sputtering like an angry insect. Tala's eyes widened. The hiss grew brighter. Kane bent, hand closing around the spitting fuse. The stick burned in his palm and threw sparks against his coat. He felt every man outside hold his breath. He didn't know if it was powder enough to take his door off its hinges, or just a bluff dressed in noise. Either way, it would answer in one heartbeat. And he had to decide now whether to throw it, swallow the blast alone, or trust the crowd to run when he hurled it back. Kane didn't blink. He curled the sparking stick hard against the heel of his scorched palm and pitched it into the horse trough. Water leapt. The fuse hissed into a bright, angry sputter, then popped like a string of holiday crackers. No blast, just white paper shreds drifting in steam, a bluff dressed in noise. The crowd's gasp broke into mean laughter. On the saloon balcony, a narrow man in a gambler's vest leaned into the heat with the lazy smile of a cat that had found the cream. Vitch. Clove tin, pinched light between two fingers. A wolf's tooth dangled on a strip of black lace at his throat, tapping an off-tempo against his vest buttons. Kane's badge flashed as he turned back into the jail. Smoke braided the air. Tala beat embers with a wet shawl. Jesse Thorne shoved his blanket through iron to smother the last orange tongues. The sheriff grabbed a bucket from the doorway and drowned what remained until the floorboards quit whispering. Doc Ellery coughed himself pink and wiped his spectacles on his sleeve. Heard a pop and thought we'd all be walking to glory. Briggs is holding on, he rasped, catching breath. He keeps saying the same fool thing. Wolf's tooth. Kane flexed his burned hand. The skin had gone tight and shiny, stung with each heartbeat. Tala tore a strip from the faded blue cloth binding the ends of her braids and wrapped his palm with quick, careful fingers. Her touch was steady, cool. He felt the cloth bite when she tied the knot. "Much obliged," he said, softer than the smoke. Outside, men started talking low, talk that carried like a snake in dry grass. No real powder, just theater. Kane's protecting someone. Deputy Briggs owes half this town. Sheriff made his collar quick. Too quick. Kane lifted his head, listening without looking. Gossip laid boards faster than a carpenter and built gallows twice as high. He checked the cell locks. 1, 2. Rance Mercer sat on his bunk, eyes fixed on the char blistering the jail's plaster. The clove, stink, clung to him. The bone charm was gone from his neck, Kane's fist still remembering its weight. The sheriff slid the bar across the door and dropped the brace into its iron shoes. Metal met metal with a final, satisfying throat clearing. "You two breathe slow," he told Tala and Thorne. "You hear more glass thrown. Keep that shawl wet." "Where are you going?" Thorne asked, the rasp in his throat sanding the words. Kane angled his hat brim against the glare. "To quiet a different fire." He stepped out into noon, sharpened to a knife edge. The rope loop above the porch beam swung idly, as if the town wind had fingers. The blacksmith stood at the pump without being told. Working the handle like purpose was a thing you could draw out of the earth. The saloon swung on brass hinges that took a beating. Piano off-key, cards slapping felt, flies doing their slow summer waltz in circles, tobacco haze, sweat. A single ceiling fan turning lazy as a sermon. Fitch held court at a back table under the portrait of a woman who'd never lived in this town. Sable hair, painted mouth, eyes that promised Pacific winds to men who'd never seen the sea. 3 men at Fitch's elbow leaned in as if the gambler's words minted coin. Briggs never met a bet he didn't think liked him. Fitch was saying, voice velvet and smoke, owed me, owed the drovers, owed a peddler out of Santa Fe. Bad company draws bad bullets. He flicked his clove tin open with his thumb, breathed that sweet spice. And Kane? He knows which way his bread's buttered. Collars a saddle tramp to keep peace with the committee. Quick and tidy. Don't trouble the town with questions. Committee. Moved through the room like a draft. Hats tipped. Eyes slid. Men pretended not to hear themselves agreeing. Kane put his back to the bar and let the room see his star. Afternoon, Sheriff. Fitch purred. Without looking up. Heard you near took up flyin' out there. Kane let his burned hand rest on the brass rail till the sting kept him honest. Funny thing, he said. An honest fuse burns down the same whether a stick's full or hollow. Men who throw fakes tend to keep their real dynamite dry. Fitch glanced up. The wolf's tooth at his throat rocked once as he smiled. You accusing a citizen of mischief in his own beer hall? I'm stating I don't like cowards. Kane pushed off the rail. Briggs woke long enough to speak. That right? Fitch tapped ash into a tray shaped like a horseshoe. And what profound scripture did the good deputy bestow on us? Wolf's tooth, Kane said. He let his gaze drop to Fitch's necklace. The room followed it, like a congregation follows the preacher's hand. Fitch's smile never cracked. He closed the tin, pocketed it, then took the charm cord in thumb and forefinger and lifted it as if admiring a lady's locket. Oh, this, fashion from Denver. Everybody's wearing 'em. You want one, Sheriff? I can have a dozen here by Friday coach. Who else is everybody? Kane asked. Name 'em. Fitch's eyes moved without moving, subtle slices across the room. The gamblers made list. Mercer's brother near the spittoon, Fitch's own dealer, the traveling photographer oiling his camera, 2 drovers Kane didn't recognize but didn't like the look of. Each wore a canine on lace or rawhide. A club you could spot from a block away if you knew to look. Wolves howling even while they pretended to be hounds. Style travels fast, Fitch said. So does rot. Kane looked past him to the hushed table, tucked nearer the kitchen door. 3 men there bent low over their cards like priests over a body. Their cuffs were soot-smudged, as if they'd leaned too near lanterns or flames. A rag-burn glow blackened the hairs on the back of one hand. Kane took a step. The room breathed in. The bartender's towel stalled on a glass. Sheriff, folks are wondering, if Briggs owed every man and dog, what's justice look like? A man with debts takes a bullet near an Apache camp, and a stranger cowboy's the only one brought in. That dog won't hunt. That dog hunts just fine if you run it on sign instead of rumor. Kane said. He turned the room with his eyes. Slow. Sign says smokeless powder in the arroyo. A Henry Bark. Clean exit wound. A shooter who knew the cut trails. I'll read that dirt before sundown. And if the dirt spells Briggs' own sins, Fitch asked, chuckling at nothing. What then? You gonna tell us your badge dragged the wrong man through our street? Kane's jaw set. I'll tell you the truth when I can put my hand on it, and if it ain't the same as what I arraigned at noon, I'll fix it with the same hands. He let the room take that all the way down. You think I won't? Try me. A chair scraped. The piano hiccuped into silence. The saloon listened to its own floor creak. From the batwing doors, a boy burst in slick with sweat. Doc Ellery's assistant, face white as lime. Sheriff, the doc says come. He blurted, Deputy Briggs. He coughed up Rivermud Black and said Ledger, and behind the map. Then he near fainted, trying to say another name. Sounded like he was chewing a nail. Fitch's clove tin clicked shut with a small, neat finality. His eyes didn't leave Kane's. Where? Kane asked the boy. Doc's back room. Kane's body wanted to run. He made it walk. Close your doors, he told the bartender without turning. No more bottles through my windows today. You host any more fires, you'll be pouring water on 'em from a jail bucket. He was pushing through the heat again when Fitch said, mild as milk, You do enjoy picking fights with your bread and butter, Sheriff. Kane tipped his hat half an inch. A nod that wasn't a nod at all. Bread and butter don't scare me. Wolves do when they pretend. Outside, the sun had slanted into a meaner angle, burning the street flat and white. The gallows shadow stretched long enough to lay across his boots as he crossed it. Twice. For luck. Or for penance. At Doc Ellery's, the back room smelled of harsh alcohol and fear. Briggs lay gray as unbaked bread, sweat soaked into the mattress like spilled broth. His chest hitched. His eyes had retreated to deep caves under his brow. On the wall above the cabinet hung a county map, rivers drawn in careful blue, mining claims in black. A red thread slashed along the ridge that made no official sense. Doc pointed without words to a stack of ledgers behind the cabinet. Kane nudged them forward. Nothing. He looked at the map again and saw the thumbprints along the bottom edge where men had lifted it too often. He slid a finger under tacked canvas and felt paper. A thin book lay in the void behind, cheap cover rubbed nearly bare by sweat and use. He eased it out. Ledger paper. Names and amounts in a hand as neat as church script. Twice-weekly sums beside initials. A drawn symbol in the margin of each entry. A tiny, neat canine tooth. Wolf's tooth. The first name in the book, cut cold through the room, L. Briggs. Then R. Mercer. F. Fitch. 3 more initials he didn't recognize. Below them, a note in a different hand, H. L. Carr, Burn, Triclove, a kind of memory or instruction. Kane's burned palm throbbed against the cloth Tala had tied. His mind flipped through faces and places like a deck in a gambler's hands. Smokeless powder, a cut trail, a Henry's bark in a dry draw, clove tins, wolf charm, soot on cuffs, a rope loop swinging where cowards liked to stand. Sheriff? Doc's voice tried not to tremble. I ain't a brave man, but if that ledger means what I think it does, you're not just holding evidence. You're holding a match over this town's powder keg. Then I'll mind my matches, Kane said. He slid the ledger into his coat, where the weight sat like a promise he couldn't break. By the time he stepped back into the street, sun had broken into amber and blood. Long shadows cut new alleys between buildings that hadn't moved an inch. Men talked in pairs now, closer, voices thick with dare and doubt, A woman yanked a child by the ear across the street without looking at him. The gallows looked taller in that light, the rope shorter. When Kane reached the jail, the porch boards creaked the way old men complain. He saw it before he heard it, a small pale triangle on the threshold. He crouched. The carved canine lay where a man might lose it, stepping fast, except it had been placed, clean, teeth up, a little grin carved along the root. A calling card. He straightened, Colt heavy and easy in his hand, and listened. The jail breathed even, no voices, no smoke. He slid the bar up, opened the door, and let the cooler air of adobe kiss his face. From the back, past the cells, something moved where it shouldn't. Just a brush of skirt against the stone, the whisper of a careful breath, the catch of a latch. A small figure eased through the rear window's shadow and dropped light as a cat to the floor inside his jail. Tala. She landed in a crouch, braid ends barely stirring, and lifted her face toward Thorne's cell with a look that said more than any word she had. Kane's badge caught a sliver of dying sun. He didn't call out. He didn't draw. He watched as the girl reached into her dress and took out a folded scrap of oilskin, slick with creek water, and slid it through the bars to the cowboy, as if passing bread to a starving man. "What did you bring into my jail, girl?" Kane asked, voice too soft to carry beyond the iron. Tala flinched, then turned, guilt and stubborn fire sharing her eyes. "What you'll need if you want truth," she whispered. Behind her, the rear latch clicked again, a sound she hadn't made. Someone else was at the window, a shadow darker than the room, bearing the careful, patient breath of a man who'd practiced killing in quiet places. Wind worried the eaves of the jailhouse like a coyote chewing bone, and the hanging lamp over Sheriff Kane's desk swung a slow circle that threw bars of shadow across the floor. The silver star in his fingers spun too, catching dull light, turning and turning as if it meant to drill a hole through his thoughts. Somewhere down the street a player piano clattered, bright and tinny, and then fell silent under a single burst of drunken laughter. In the back cell, the cowboy sat on the bunk, with his hat brimming dust between his boots. Jesse Crow, 20-something, rain-cut jaw, the look of a man who'd ridden too far with too little sleep. His wrists bore the red rings of fresh irons. His eyes bore older marks, hard miles and harder choices. Kane rose when the knock came. Not the bold hammering of a posse, not the sly scratch of a thief. A soft knuckle tap, like a prayer that feared being heard. He eased the door open. An Apache girl stood in the hard night, dark hair rope braided, a shawl drawn up against the wind. The lantern glow brushed bone beads at her throat. Dust clung to her bare feet, as if reluctant to let her go. "Nayeli," Kane said, voice low. He'd seen her in the street at the arrest, seen her go to her knees for a man wearing irons. It's past visiting hours. Her chin lifted. There are no hours for mercy. She slipped past him, small and sure. The jail's smell, oil, old smoke, iron, folded around her. 5 minutes, Kane said, relocking the door. His badge spun once more, then stilled against his palm. Jesse didn't stand when she reached the bars. He only looked up, like a man bracing to take a bullet clean. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. "I should," she answered, fingers light on the iron. Her whisper carried the desert's rasp. "They say you shot a rancher. They say you stole a bay mare. But we both know what you took was a beating meant for me." Jesse's gaze slid to Kane. "Sheriff, you ever notice how truth and a noose favor the same neck?" His crooked smile didn't reach his eyes. "I told you. Fog settled thick that night. Hard to see who did what. "It ain't fog that's thick," Kane said, studying him. "It's fear." The lamp crackled as if agreeing. Nayeli leaned closer. "He won't tell you, Sheriff. His pride won't fit through the bars." Her eyes found Jesse's. "You bled on the river stones to give me time to run. They would have taken me back." A beat. To him. Kane's jaw set. Him. He'd heard the name in whispers all day. Zebediah Sloan, cattle foreman and power broker, brother to Kane's own deputy. Men like Sloan bought iron with gold and verdicts with whiskey. Jesse shook his head once, sharp and tired. "Leave the past in the river, girl." Nayeli didn't blink. "And drown in it?" She turned to Kane, urgency trembling beneath her voice. "A rider came to our camp while you were gone, an old woman from the White River people. She says your deputy spoke last night with a man wearing a marshal's coat. Coins changed hands. A paper changed hands." Kane felt the badge grow cold in his palm. Paper. He pictured a federal seal pressed into wax, tidy words stacked like bullets. Transfer of prisoner, expedite, no delay. As if conjured, boot heels rang on the porch. The door rattled under a fist that knew its rights. Kane flipped the latch. 3 men came in smelling of rain and horse, 2 troopers, and between them a narrow man in a black frock coat, with a star pinned under the lapel like a secret. "Territorial Marshal Elias Pike," he announced, voice flat and eastern. He produced the paper with the relish of a dealer turning his ace. Red wax bled at the edge of a stamped seal. "By order of the district court, I am to take custody of one Jesse Crow for conveyance to Pinedale." Kane didn't look at the writ first. He watched Pike's eyes. They had the shine of a man who kept accounts, not with the law, but with men who paid better. Then he took the paper. The seal was right. The language was right. But the judge's name had an extra curl in the hand, a telltale flourish Kane remembered from counterfeit drafts seized 2 winters ago. He smelled lamp black, where legal ink should have stung like iron. "Convenient timing," Kane said, folding the paper once. "Word didn't ride that fast in my territory before." Pike's mouth stayed thin. "We ride faster when a rancher dies, Sheriff. A rancher who whipped an Apache girl till she bled," Nayeli said, stepping from the shadow like a whisper given teeth. One of the troopers reached for her. Kane's look stopped him colder than snowmelt. Pike's gaze flicked over her, measuring. Savage testimony, how quaint. Kane felt heat crawl up his spine. He set the writ down on the desk beside an inkwell cut from a spent cartridge. "Marshal," he said softly, "you may find we've got different dictionaries. In mine, a writ don't run if it stinks." Pike took one slow step forward, shoulders still, eyes bright. "It runs where the court says it runs." "Law ain't always justice," Kane murmured, and the lamp's flame popped, as if it knew what came next. He rolled the badge along his knuckles, then let it sit heavy against the scar at his jaw. "But justice rides with me." The troopers shifted. The room shrank to a breath and a heartbeat. Jesse Crow's chain slid against iron, a tired, fatal music. "You'll obstruct a federal order then?" Pike said, no question in it. "Bold, Sheriff. Unwise." "Fair," Kane corrected. "Unwise is letting a dead man sign a writ." He tapped the flourish on the judge's name. "Judge Rathbone lost that hand after the Blue Creek riot. Can't make curls he ain't got." For the first time a hairline crack ran through Pike's composure. He didn't answer at once. The wind whistled down the stovepipe. Somewhere a signboard squealed on its hook. Then Pike smiled without humor. "Very well. We'll return with proper ink and proper friends." They turned for the door. Kane slid the bolt home behind them and stood for a long beat with his palm on the wood. The nerves in his hand buzzed, as if the badge had bled current into bone. Outside, boot steps faded. Inside, the quiet crawled back into the corners. "Sheriff," Nayeli whispered. "He won't come back with paper. He'll come back with fire." Kane faced the cell. Jesse's eyes were not grateful. They were calculating. "You just made yourself a target, Lawman." "Been one," Kane said, "since the day my boy died." The words surprised even him. Smoke from an old fire. He reached for the coffee pot, old habit, truce offering, and poured a tin cup through the bars. Jesse took it, sniffed, sipped. Nayeli watched Kane watching the mouth of the cup, like a hawk watches field mice. There, faint but wrong, bitter almond cut with cheap chicory. Kane's nostrils flared. His hand moved of its own. He slapped the cup from Jesse's fingers. It hit the floor and split the quiet with a clatter that went on too long. "What in—" Jesse started. Kane crouched, drew a finger through the puddle, touched it to his tongue, then spat hard into the straw. "Prussic," he said. "Not enough to kill quick, but enough to put a man to sleep and never have him wake for a rope." Nayeli's eyes widened. "Who?" Kane didn't answer. He was already moving, lamp held high, checking the small things that tell on men. A scuffed board behind the stove where a boot had dragged. A thread of black wool snagged on a nail-head near the cell block door. A keyring hook bare on the wall where it shouldn't be. He'd nailed that hook himself. Only 3 men handled those keys. Kane, the night deputy, and Deputy Sloan stepped through the inner door then, hat in hand, breath fogging in the chill draft. His eyes traveled the room too fast. "Heard voices," Sloan said. "Everything square?" Kane thumbed the hammer on his Colt a single notch. The sound was quiet, and it filled the whole building. "Where were you?" "In back," Sloan said, checking the stock. "We ain't got stock," Kane replied. A silence like the moments after thunder. Sloan's gaze ticked to the fallen cup, to the wet stain inching under the bars toward Jesse's boots, to Nayeli's steady stare. His throat worked once. "Take a walk," Kane said. "Clear your head." Sloan didn't move. Somewhere outside, a horse blew and stamped. Another pair of boots came up onto the porch, quick, confident. The outer latch tested, then rattled harder. Pike again, or Sloan's brother with a rope. Kane took 2 steps and unbarred the door with a speed that startled even him, yanking it wide to meet whatever came. But it wasn't Pike. Zebediah Sloan filled the threshold like a storm front, rain beating on the wolf fur collar of his coat. A dozen ranch hands massed behind him, faces shadowed by hats and hunger for spectacle. "Evening, Sheriff," Zeb drawled, eyes already crawling over the cells. "Word is you got a murderer that needs killing. Figured we'd save the county the price of a trial." Kane's palm found the badge again, spun it once, stilled it. "This jail is the law's house," he said, "not yours." Zeb smiled, teeth small and neat, the smile of a banker counting your debts. "Law's whatever a crowd can carry, last I checked." Behind Kane, iron whispered, a hinge that shouldn't move, moving. He turned, too late. The back cell door stood open like a black mouth. Chains lay in a heap on the straw, still warm from wrists. Jesse Crow was gone. Nayeli's breath left her in a sound that wasn't a word. Sloan, Deputy Sloan, Had a key ring in his hand he hadn't a moment ago, and God help them, another star in his pocket glinted as he slipped it half out. U.S. Deputy Marshal, shiny as a lie. By authority of the territory, Sloane said, lifting the gun he hadn't drawn yet in 3 years at Kane's side. You're relieved of duty. Sheriff Kane, hand over that badge. The wind gusted, the lamp swung, the shadow of the bars crawled across Kane's face like the grip of a noose. And from the alley beyond the cells came the soft click of a rifle being thumbed to ready, and a voice Jesse's, and not Jesse's, low, hoarse, close, whispering through the dark. Make the wrong choice, Sheriff, and I'll decide for you. The lantern hissed like a snake in the jailhouse and threw a wavering yoke of light across iron bars, plank floor, and the map of scars time had carved into Sheriff Kane's face. Outside, the wind dragged grit down Main Street until it sounded like a long match struck against the town's dry throat. Beyond that, the slow groan of wood from the gallows they'd built that afternoon. Someone had left the noose swaying. It bumped the post in the night, with a hollow thock, 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 like a heart that refused to die. Kane sat alone at his desk, with the silver star cupped in his palm, thumb spinning it, slowing it, spinning it again. He could feel the badge's weight as if it tugged at the bones of his wrist. Law, hammered thin and bright. Justice, something heavier, invisible, always asking. The Apache girl's plea lived in his head now, a brand that wouldn't cool. Her voice had been rasped raw by dust, but stubborn as mesquite. He saved me, not a bandit, not that kind. Behind the bars, the cowboy watched him through the dim. He stood easy despite shackles, hat pushed low, jacket dark with road. A smear of dried blood lived along his collarbone, the kind that didn't come from fighting for your wallet. He looked at Kane with quiet acceptance, the hard kind. Men who had already counted their endings did that. You want to tell it again? Kane asked, voice flat as the table between them. Won't make you sleep better, the cowboy said. He had a soft panhandle drawl and a way of speaking like each word hurt if it ran. Marshal Hollis Pike took bribe gold from the railroad. Captain Mallory tried to clear me out for knowing it. I put Mallory in the dirt to keep the girl breathing. That's my gospel. Kane tasted iron in the back of his throat. That wasn't blood. Hollis Pike, territorial authority, a man with a paper halo and a courtroom handshake, a man whose telegram that morning had said, hold prisoner for transfer at dawn, no questions, official as a headstone. The badge spun once more under Kane's thumb. It quivered and lay still. Boots thudded the boardwalk outside. The deputy, Rowan Rourke, pushed in with the night clinging to his coat, cheeks pink with whiskey or anger. Town's heating, he said, setting a printed broadside on the desk with 2 fingers. Warrant of immediate surrender. Rourke's eyes glittered. Pike wired the judge. They aim to make an example before the railroad men ride through. That noose is a timetable, Sheriff. Law's got clocks, Kane said. So does conscience. Rourke laughed. It carried a brittle edge, glass on stone. Conscience don't feed a town. You give him up, the judge pats our heads. Pike owes you. The rails keep coming. You hold him. We get a rope pulled by a crowd that spells your name wrong when they chant. He reached toward the ring of keys on a hook. Kane's hand moved faster. He laid 2 fingers on Rourke's wrist, light, cold. Rourke stopped, because you always stopped, when the room learned you were outmatched. Keys stay, Kane said. You mean to stand against a warrant. I mean to stand between a man and a bad end, till I know what end he earned. Rourke's mouth soured. The lantern picked out a nick in his jawline. He'd shaved, hurried. That girl's got you clutched by the heart. You keeping a savage's testimony in your book now. The line crawled under Kane's skin and nested there. Memory rose. His wife's knuckles pale on a blanket's edge, his boy's wooden horse left on a floor that never saw small feet again. The sluggish knock of rain on a coffin-lid morning. He softly exhaled. "Watch your tongue," he said, and the tone turned the air colder. Something whispered across the front windows, a crowd, gathering like brush fire. Kane stood and shouldered the 10-gauge off its pegs. He stepped to the door and pushed it open on night. 20 faces, 30, waited the dark beyond the hitch rail. Storekeepers, swarthy drifters, boys with peachy whiskers acting like men. Their guns hung low, their fear rode high. The gallows creaked again. Thock, thock. Over by the livery, a slat rattled, but a drunk hissed, "Hang him, and hang the sheriff if he don't pass him over." Kane set the shotgun against the post and spoke into the dust. "You test my door, I'll count you as wolves. Wolves get put down." His voice didn't travel like a shout. It carried like a sermon bell, even and unquestioning. Somewhere a mother shushed a child. Metal rasped, someone reconsidering the draw they'd started. A small figure stepped from between two men and lifted her chin. The Apache girl, hair braided away from a face too young to have eyes that old. She had a strip of blue cloth knotted around her wrist, cavalry sash torn and kept like proof. "You promised to listen," she said to Kane. "I speak where all can hear." She raised the strip in the lantern glow. This was Captain Mallory's. He wore it when he came to the arroyo where our women washed clothes. He said we were thieves of government water. He struck me. The cowboy pulled him off me and told me to run. I ran. Shots followed. Kane heard a mutter roll through the crowd. Rourke eased forward beside him. "She'll say any firelight's the sky," he sneered. "Mallory's dead. Dead men can't answer. All we got is a girl from a tribe that don't take kindly to fences." Kane turned. "You don't take kindly to truth, either." Rourke's lips peeled back. "Ain't your job to sort the Almighty's ledger, Sheriff. It's to hand bodies to the judge who claims 'em. Don't get fancy." That was when another set of hooves clattered hard into the street. 4 riders shouldered the crowd aside, on black horses blacker than the hour. The lad man wore a clean town coat that made mud nervous, and the star on his breast was bigger than Kane's. Marshal Hollis Pike swung down and tipped his hat as if he liked theater. "Evening, Sheriff. I'll take custody." He held up papers in the lamplight. "Territorial order. Boy gets tried at Fort Adams where juries don't go soft when their ladies weep." "Ladies weep 'cause men misbehave," Kane said. He didn't take the papers. "Why a rush, Pike? He running somewhere besides the gallows?" Pike smiled with his eyes and not at all with his mouth. "I run on schedule. Railroads do, too." The cowboy behind the bars cleared his throat. "Ask him where he was the night the pay wagon went light. Ask him what Captain Mallory knew about it. Ask him what he paid Deputy Rourke to keep the livery boys quiet." A silence snapped tight as a wire. Rourke said too quickly, "That's hogwash." Pike's gaze slid to the deputy like a knife under a rib. "You talking, Rourke? I don't hear yes, Marshal, in that tone." Kane felt the room tilt. There it was, the seam he'd been sniffing. He looked at Pike's boots. Dust from the south road clung white to the edges. Pike had ridden hard from the fort, and the fort sat on railroad land, and the railroad liked trouble, solved cheap and final. The badge in Kane's palm grew hot, then heavy. He remembered his boy's weight asleep against his coat, the small, steady breath he'd never feel again. He pictured a rope, a crowd, a neat certificate signed by a distant judge, whose ink never met the blood it authorized. He heard his wife's voice from years he kept in a locked drawer. "You will be the kind of man who stands between." And finally, deep down where the cold lived, his own reply rose up. "Law ain't always justice," he said, quiet as a prayer, hard as a hammer. "But justice rides with me." He unhooked the keys and stepped to the cell. The cowboy looked surprised, then respectful, as if something sacred had been spoken between them and not allowed at all. Kane jammed steel into the lock. "You ain't free," he told the man. "You're moving. The gallows is a mob with a carpenter. I'll get you to a judge that listens with both ears." Pike's hand drifted toward his belt. "You open that door, Sheriff. You make yourself my quarry." Kane swung the cell wide. The iron squealed. He took the prisoner's shackled wrist and brought him forward into the lantern glow. Rourke took one step toward them and found himself looking down the black mouth of Kane's Colt, which had arrived in Kane's hand without any wasted motion. "Don't," Kane said. One syllable, and the room obeyed. They moved as a slow machine, sheriff and shackled man, toward the rear door and the alley's thinner dark. The Apache girl ghosted that way before them, quick as a thought. On the desk, the silver badge lay alone now, catching the lantern's tremble. A star adrift. Behind, the front door banged as Pike's men shoved in. Board chairs scraped. Rourke hissed words Kane couldn't make out. Someone toppled the potbelly stove and the coals breathed fire. The crowd out front startled and surged. The jailhouse breathed smoke. Kane pushed the back door open with his shoulder, and a rifle muzzle met his temple from the alley shadow. The cold circle of it stung like sleet. "Drop the gun, Sheriff," a voice said, slick and pleased. "Hands high. We'll take the prisoner and your soul along with him." Kane did not turn his head. He swallowed smoke and tasted old ash. For a heartbeat, all he heard was the gallows outside ticking its dead metronome. Thock, thock. The cowboy beside him stood very still. The Apache girl froze like a fawn, hearing brush break. Kane lifted his hands. The Colt hovered, then tipped. The voice in the dark laughed once. Soft. "That's right. Now step away, nice and—" Another sound cut him off. Not the click of a trigger, the chime of metal against wood from inside the jail where Kane's badge, shaken off the desk by the crowd's tremor, slipped and fell to the floor with a bright, ringing note. The rifle at Kane's skull pressed harder. "Move," the voice said, "or I paint this alley with the law." By mid-afternoon, the heat lay on the town like a wet blanket, and the dust along Main Street held the boot prints of half a county. Sheriff Kane stood behind his desk, with the ledger he'd dug out from beneath Deputy Pike's cot, a narrow book, bound in cracked oilskin, pages stiff with spilled whiskey, and the kind of names men didn't write unless they were sure no one would ever read them. He turned a leaf with his thumb. Dates, sums, initials, a broken-backed scrawl in Pike's hand beside a tidy signature, J. V. Manders, Railroad Claims. The margin note made his jaw tighten. Diversion, hang the drifter. The jailhouse seemed to breathe around him, board walls creaking, iron bars ticking as the sun heated them. In the cell, the cowboy he'd arrested that morning sat on the bench, hands cuffed, hat brim shadowing a face young enough to still look surprised by cruelty. He had given his name as Colter Reese, and little else. The Apache girl stood just inside the door, dust on her skirt, hair braided tight as a lariat. Taylor. Kane had learned her name 2 days ago, but the way she carried silence made it feel older. Kane slid the ledger across the desk toward her. "You can read that, Mark." His voice was low, stripped down to wire. Tala stepped close, the smell of sage and horse on her. She traced a finger over a stamp in red wax that sealed the back pages, a stylized sun with 4 rays. Her eyes cooled. "Santa Vereda mining claim. My people were driven from that canyon." Coulter lifted his face. "I told you, Sheriff. What happened at the canyon wasn't me." Kane set the ledger down and spun his silver badge once between forefinger and thumb. The metal flashed like a fish in a river and came to rest, stamped with the long scar on his knuckle. "This book says Deputy Lyman Pike and Manders paid men to raid Apache camps, pin it on drifters, sell the land cheap to the railroad. This morning..." He tapped the final entry, dated clean as judgment. "Make a spectacle, hang the hand. That would be you." Tala's chin rose. "He spared my little brother at the creek. I saw him turn his gun away." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "That man with him, the one who wore the town star without earning it, he fired, not Coulter." Kane held her gaze, then looked through the bars at the boy. He remembered the spray of river water in his mind's eye, the cold rush that lived inside his chest whenever children bled. His wife's face flickered behind his lids, followed by the small hand he'd never hold again. For a moment his breath shuddered, and the badge spun again, slower this time, like a coin losing hope. The street outside began to swell with sound. The clatter of wagon rims, the buzz of voices turned sharper. Kane crossed to the window. A crowd had gathered, their faces pulled tight by heat and talk. The blacksmith wiped his forearms with a rag and nodded at men who wouldn't meet Kane's eyes. The owner of the hotel cupped a hand to her mouth, shouting toward the saloon. And over it all, bright as a slash of lightning, the courthouse bell pealed once, twice, a third time. Alarm or summons. Sometimes in towns like this, they were the same. "Word's gone wrong," Kane said. He heard the bell's echo roll over the gallows at the end of the street. The structure stood like a bleached rib cage against the sky. A boy darted past with rope coiled in his arms as though he were late to a picnic. Coulter stood, chains whispering. "Sheriff, if they'll listen, give me a minute to speak." Kane cut him off with a glance. "You'll get your minute in court. That's the only minute I'm bound to guarantee." Tala stepped to the bars. Bound by a badge made crooked? He let the words land. They stung because they were true enough to bruise. He closed the ledger, slid it inside his coat. "Crooked or not, it's the badge we've got, and I intend to make it hold." They heard the door before it opened, boots scuffing hard, then banging. 4 men shouldered in, townsfolk behind them like a flood. Lyman Pike came first, hat low, eyes bright, with a fever that was not sickness. His star caught the light, but didn't glow right. "Afternoon, Sheriff," he drawled, hand near his gun, but not quite on it. "Judge Prentice has called an emergency session at the Gallows. Says the town's peace requires a swift rope. We're here to relieve you of the prisoner." Kane took 1 step left, so the iron key hung behind his hip, where Pike couldn't reach. The judge holds court in the courthouse, not under a sky with a rope in it. That dog won't hunt, Lyman. Behind Pike, the crowd pressed forward, a hot, nervous breath. Torches swaying though the day was bright. Someone shouted, "He shot a settler at the creek." Someone else snarled, "Apache lover, send him back east." A woman, voice cracking with something older than this day, cried, "My boy never came home from that canyon." Grief and rumor had hands on the same throat. Pike smiled, thin as a knife blade. "You see, Sheriff, folks want safety, not sermons." His eyes flicked to Tala, "and they don't want redskin talk muddying decent water." Tala did not flinch. "You sell their sons to mines and call it safety." The air snapped tight. Kane tasted iron. He lifted his palm, flat. "Back up from my door," he said. The room heard the weight buried under his voice. Even the timber walls seemed to lean away. Pike laughed, but it spilled out brittle. "You gonna shoot your own town, Kane? Over a drifter and a squaw?" Kane's face didn't move, but inside, a wire stretched. He'd spent the morning turning over the question that was his life. Law or justice? Letter or mercy? The ledger in his coat felt like a loaded second gun. When he spoke, the words were slow enough to count. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." He rotated his wrist and the badge flashed once, an oath sealed in sunlight. A bottle arced through the window and burst against the bars, showering the cell with stink and glass. Coulter flinched, arms up. Tala dragged him back with both hands, a low hiss between her teeth. Outside, somebody whooped. The sound ran along the line like a struck match. Men surged. The doorframe shrieked as shoulders hit it. The jailhouse rocked on its haunches. Kane moved like a man who had rehearsed this in the dark. He stomped the butt of his rifle into the floor, racked around with a sound that straightened spines. "Pike," he said, quiet enough to make them all lean in to hear, "you take one more inch without a writ, and I'll count it an armed break. That gives me leave to plant you." Pike's lips peeled back from his teeth. "Judge's bell is writ enough." He flicked 2 fingers, and the men at his shoulder lifted a beam they'd torn from the livery. The first hit took the door at the hinge and sent a crack up the jamb like lightning across dry ground. Screams teetered on the edge of joy. Somewhere, a baby wailed. Kane backed to the cell. He unlocked it, pushed Coulter and Tala through the inner door that led to the narrow booking room. "Down," he snapped. He kicked open the trap to the holding pit beneath. A crawl space no one knew but him. "Move, now." The earth smell rose wet and cool. Coulter balked. "If I run." "You're not running. You're surviving for one more minute till I buy you another." Kane thrust the ledger into Tala's hands. "If I fall, you get this to the circuit marshal in Red Bluff. He's clean. Ask for Silas Hart." Pike's beam hammered again. Splinters jumped like fleas. Tala's fingers tightened around the ledger. "You stand alone against many," she whispered. Kane allowed himself one corner of a smile. "I've been outnumbered since I took the oath." He shoved them into the pit and dropped the hatch. The room breathed once, lighter. The next strike kicked the door inward. Pike came with it, gun high, eyes bright. 3 men poured after him, rage drunk. Kane didn't aim at Pike's heart. He blew the lantern off the wall. Darkness fell like a stage curtain. Men yelled. In the thick black, the sheriff moved by memory, counting steps, hearing breath. He clubbed the nearest with the rifle stock and felt bone give. Another clutched at him. He drove an elbow into ribs, shoved, fired a single blinding shot into the ceiling to send the crowd outside stumbling back. Smoke took the air. The dark turned gray. Pike's muzzle flash bloomed. The bullet sang past Kane's ear and licked a furrow from the doorpost. Kane dropped behind the desk and felt a heat on his cheek, That was not fire, but anger. He popped up on the far side and fired low, taking Pike in the thigh. The deputy screamed, went down, and his gun skittered under the bench like a scared rat. "Fall back," someone howled from outside. "Bring the rope. Burn him out." The word burn rippled through the crowd the way plague ripples through a camp. A tin bucket clanged against the stoop, then the ugly slosh of lamp oil on wood. The smell rose oily, inevitable. Kane stepped into the doorway, badge bright on his chest, pistol steady. First man with a torch takes the first bullet. His voice carried, clean and cold. For a heartbeat, the town held. He saw faces he'd sworn to protect, faces that had cheered him and cursed him, a dozen lives overlapping the ones he couldn't save. Somewhere a church bell stuttered like a frightened heart. Then an old rancher, Cowboy, drunk on fear and sun, lunged forward with a sputtering brand, tripped, and flung it wild. It struck the eave and stuck, orange licking upward along dry timber. Flames ran like gossip. Inside, Pike, bleeding, levered himself up on one elbow and grinned through his pain. "You can't shoot all of 'em, Kane." Kane holstered slow, turned, and walked to the cell. He reached for his keys. Behind the grate, the empty bench looked back like a dare. He bent, gripped the edge of the trap he'd just sealed, and hesitated. A shot cracked from the street, and a window burst. Glass hissed across his hat brim. A new voice cut the riot like a saw blade. Judge Prentice at the foot of the gallows, black coat flapping, arm raised. "Sheriff," he cried, righteous thunder in his throat. "As circuit judge, I order you to surrender the prisoner to the will of the town." Kane looked at the flames, at the ledger no longer in his coat, at Pike's bright, hateful eyes, at the badge spinning once more between his fingers. He had seconds to decide between two kinds of law, the statute and the truth. He closed his fist around the star until the points bit. Then he reached for the trap handle. Outside, the crowd roared as the fire found the jailhouse roof, and the first rope was thrown over the gallows beam. The knot swung, a dark moon against the sky. To save a boy and the truth, would he have to hang his badge? The trapdoor lifted, the smoke rushed down, and Sheriff Kane dropped into the dark. Dawn came pale and mean, lighting the smoke-scorched ribs of Main Street and throwing the gallows' shadow long as a river. People gathered with their coats clutched and their hat brims low. Breath ghosting in the chill. The noose swayed gently, creaking like an old prayer. Beneath it stood the cowboy with the rope collar grazing his cheek. Dust-caked, wrists bound, jaw locked against fear. He tipped his chin to the horizon as if to memorize the color of morning. On the steps, the Apache girl knelt, bare feet in frost, fingers laced so tight the knuckles shone. She did not cry, not anymore. Judge Prentice mounted the platform, black coat flapping like a raven's wing. Marshal Hollis Pike stood to the side with two troopers, and a paper rolled in his fist like a cudgel. A scatter of wolf-tooth charms winked in the crowd. Fitch on the saloon rail, the Mercer boys by the pump, Zeb Sloan with a grin thin as wire and a matchbook in his pocket. "By order of the court," Prentice declaimed, voice fat with certainty, "the town secures its peace." "Judge," Tala said, her voice sanded but steady, "peace paid for with lies will cost you double." "Take her down," Pike snapped. Hands reached to drag her away, then stilled when the crowd felt a temperature drop that had nothing to do with weather. Sheriff Kane stepped out of the smoke, coat charred at the hem, one palm bandaged blue and white, the other holding his silver star as if he were weighing it. He walked like a man measuring a distance he'd walk only once. He climbed the steps, uninvited. Wood boomed under his boots. The cowboy's eyes flicked to him, surprised and not. The judge eyed the burn at Kane's cuff and smiled without warmth. "You're late to your duty, Sheriff." "Maybe I'm right on time," Kane said, setting the star on the gallows rail where the sun could find it. The badge spun once in a shallow circle and stopped, pointing at the rope. Pike lifted his warrant. Kane didn't look at it. He looked at the crowd, faces he'd greeted for years with the same tight nod, faces that had called for him in the night, cursed him in the morning, asked him to carry their secrets like fire. He saw Doc Ellery with ash on his sleeve, and the blacksmith's wife with her jaw fixed, and her hands in her pockets like she'd smuggled courage there. Kane turned to the condemned. "Your true name." The cowboy cleared his throat. "Jesse Thorne," he said, then a faint rueful smile. "Folks called me Crow in Kansas, Colter Reese over the Pecos, names by a day when wolves run close." "Jesse Thorne it is," Kane said. "You'll meet your judge with your own name." Pike stepped sideways, keeping the drop lever in his view. "You don't choose the court, Sheriff. The court chooses you." Kane's burned hand closed. "Law ain't always justice," he said levelly, and the words drew every head a fraction forward. "But justice rides with me." He turned to the crowd. "This town's been handled by men who cut their paper with lampblack and their coin with blood. I've got the proof." He nodded down into the press of bodies. A small shape, shouldered through hips and elbows, ledger hugged to her chest. Tala mounted the first stair and held the book up high. Names, sums, orders. Her voice cut thin but sharp. Railroad claims agent with Marshal Pike's signature beside. A note. Diversion. Hang the hand. Another. Use clove. Wolf's tooth marks paid. A ripple ran through the crowd, louder than wind. Fitch's smile faltered. His fingers went unconsciously to the charm at his throat. Zeb Sloan swore softly and stopped smiling altogether. Pike didn't move. Prentice tried to thunder. "Trinkets and scrawl, the law." "Judge," Doc Ellery broke in, voice shaking but clear. "I watched men die under your quick rope and found the miner's scrip in their boots. I saw your clerk change a line on a deed, then change his coat." He looked to Kane. "You're not wrong." Pike's troopers shifted, eyes finding each other in the way of men choosing how dangerous they wanted to be for their pay. Zeb Sloan decided first. He yanked his Colt and drove for the girl and the ledger. Kane moved at the same heartbeat. His burned hand snapped the knife from his belt, bright, fast, and rose to the rope. The blade bit hemp. Fibers popped like muffled shots. Tala flinched. Jesse Thorne's breath hitched. Pike shouted. The judge's mouth opened wide enough to swallow his tongue. The knife finished its arc. The noose fell free, thumping the platform like a heart. For a half-breath, the whole town forgot how to breathe. Then it remembered all at once and roared. Zeb's gun fired as the roar broke. The shot tore a splinter from the post where Tala's hair had been a blink ago. Kane's Colt was already up. The pearl grip kissed his palm, steady as truth. He didn't shoot Zeb in the head. He shot him in the wrist. Bone cracked. The gun cartwheeled into the dust and disappeared under boots. Pike lunged for the drop lever. Kane kicked the plank up and out, jamming it with his heel. "You pull iron," he said, voice calm as winter. "Fine, but you don't pull wood on my watch." "Arrest him?" Prentice shrieked. "On what charge?" A new voice rang, iron on granite. Men turned. The rail-slim figure of a rider in plain trail coat and federal star cut through the human swell. U.S. Marshal Silas Hart, dust from 1,000 miles crusted white along his seams. 6 deputies fanned with him like geese on a cold river. When Hart spoke again, it was for the town and the morning. On the charge of obeying a lawful oath? Pike seemed to shrink and grow sharp at once, like a blade drawn from water. Hart, you overreach. I do my job, Hart said. He took the ledger from Tala's hands with a nod that made her spine straighten and flipped pages. His mouth thinned. Hollis Pike, he read. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and murder by design, with Judge Prentice, an accessory before and after. He looked up. Hands! The crowd, always braver in a pack, shouted 3 different things at once. But it wasn't a pack anymore. It was a field of single men and women. A few stepped back from the gallows. One took his wolf tooth off and slid it into his pocket, like a sin he might confess later. Fitch drifted toward a doorway, as if hoping the morning would forget his face. Pike did not give his hands. He snatched for the rolled warrant, not to show it, but to hide his draw. His gun flashed cold and quick. Kane's did not. It simply opened fire. The first round hammered Pike's shoulder and spun him. The second knocked the pistol away. Pike skidded across the planks like a thrown spur and lay with his breath ragged and his eyes full of hatred and astonishment. Zeb Sloan lunged for Tala again, this time for her throat. Jesse Thorne, wrists bound, dove like a man who had no hands to lose, and headbutted Zeb at the knee. The ranch boss buckled. Tala swung the ledger like a brick and cracked it across Zeb's temple. He went slack into the rail, teeth pink. Hart's deputies swarmed Prentice. The judge found a sermon left. You don't know these people. I know enough, Hart said, binding him, and I know the smell of doctrine laid over rot. The morning light had hardened to a color like hammered brass. Smoke from the burned jail lifted, thin and blue. Kane lowered his Colt, heart banging like a miner's pick in a shaft. He looked at Jesse Thorne, at the rope coiled on the deck, like a dead snake, at Tala with her braid ends trembling, and the ledger weightless now in somebody else's hands. He lifted the fallen noose, held it up to the light. This, he said, then let it drop, is not the law. Jesse swallowed. What now? Now, Kane said. We do the thing all cowards fear. We tell the truth slow, and we sign our names to it. He turned to the crowd. You want to call me traitor for saving a man to face a real judge? Do it to my face in daylight. You want to ride with me to take statements and bring others to heel? Saddle up. His voice roughened. But if you came for a hanging bought with ledger ink and clove smoke, go home. Silence held the town with surprising gentleness. A woman began to cry, small, relieved tears, and a man put his arm around her in a way that suggested he'd finally remembered his first job. Hart's deputies hauled Pike and Prentice down the steps. Zeb Sloan rolled to his knees and found Kane's shadow covering him. Rowan Sloan, deputy no longer, stood at the edge of the platform with his hat in his hands, eyes on his boots. He looked like a man who'd realized the wind had turned, and he wasn't wearing a coat. Kane looked down at the badge where it sat on the rail. He picked it up, turned it in the light, and pinned it back to his chest. It felt heavier. It felt right. He cut Jesse Thorne's bonds with the same knife that had cut the rope. You're not free, he told him. You're coming to court, with counsel, and the whole town watching. You'll speak, I'll stand. He glanced at Tala. Both of you will. Tala nodded once. We will. Kane took them both by the shoulders and turned to the steps. His boots hit the ground, and the crowd parted without complaint. Dawn had sharpened fully. Shadows drew short. The gallows creaked once more, as if remembering an appointment it would not keep today. Far down the street, a boy dragged a bucket to the pump, and the bell over the church door rang out not as alarm, but as invitation. Kane breathed in the cold and tasted something new where the rope smell had lived. Behind him, the noose lay on the planks, like a question answered. He did not look back. Smoke had a way of finding him. It found him in the burned belly of his jail, in the shoelace hiss of a fuse, in the memory of a night when a rope swung over the wrong man, and no one spoke. He had worn the badge like a shield and a sin, telling himself he was only the hinge on the door, that what passed through wasn't his to judge. But hinges rust, and doors stick, and sometimes the house burns if you don't put your shoulder to it. He thought of his wife's hands, and the boy's breath, and the old ache that set his jaw crooked. He had said the words 100 times. Law ain't always justice. And today he'd pressed them into the wood of the gallows with a knife and a choice. It cost him. It would cost him again. He'd made enemies with paper and friends who carried fire, and he'd traded the easy comfort of a crowd's cheer for the harder weight of a town's slow change. The badge sat heavier on his chest now, not because it was tarnished, but because it meant something. He could live with that. He would.